Well, hello, this is Dr. David Jockers, and today I'm talking about histamine intolerance. As a functional medicine practitioner, I deal with a wide variety of challenging health cases, and histamine intolerance is definitely something I stumbled across about 5 or 6 years ago, and it has been a game changer in understanding this condition and how to really help people that are dealing with this. I'm going to go through that in today's presentation. And so, when we look at histamine. Histamine is this major neurotransmitter and immune messenger molecule. One of the key things it does is it helps to produce stomach acid. It helps to initiate the production of stomach acid. You have four different types of histamine receptors located throughout the body, in the nervous system, in the blood vessels for dilation, in the immune system. And so they play a really, really critical role. And one of the jobs of histamine is to triage water into major areas when the body's under stress. So it tries to triage the water to put it into the vital organs when the body's under stress. It also activates the immune system. And so it increases capillary permeability, creates bronchoconstriction, creates, basically it's associated with the stress response, and it can cause tachycardia. And because we have histamine receptors in the skin, it can lead to things like hives, for example, and swelling and inflammation throughout the body. So, how does histamine affect you? For certain individuals, because their body, they're either overproducing histamine or they're not good at breaking down, metabolizing histamine, they can end up with things like acid reflux, really challenging pain in their gut, chronic itching and hives, and headaches. These are common symptoms. And so we look at the molecule histidine, which is produced that then converts into histamine. And the histamine can circulate, and I believe it's the H2 receptors that are in the stomach, the one of the four different types of histamine receptors that the histamine interacts with and helps stimulate the production of hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid is a not only a digestive aid, but also it protects our body from infections getting in, because the acid is very acidic and it breaks down bacteria and different types of pathogens from getting into our system. Now, in the brain, it's going to cause, basically, it's going to help regulate sleep. It's going to play a big role with arousal. In particular, histamine gives us a little bit more of a heightened sense of alertness because, again, it's associated with a stress response. So, in the immune system, it's going to vasodilate different blood vessels. It's going to create more inflammation, activate the macrophages, and increase an inflammatory response in the body. Now, the things that break down histamine, there's two of them: HNMT, which is something like histamine N-methyltransferase, and then you've got diamine oxidase, DAO. And so both of these really help to break down histamine. The histamine N-methyltransferase is in the nervous system, and the DAO would be in your blood as well as in your gut, right? So those other areas where we're dealing with histamine. Now, what happens when we have too much histamine? It can come from a number of things. It can come from eating too much high histamine foods that I'm going to go through in a few minutes. And this is really common because a lot of the high histamine foods are marketed as being really healthy for everybody, superfoods. And so there are things like fermented foods and aged cheeses, and even avocados are a higher histamine food. And so it can be very easy to overdo high histamine foods. And then you may also be producing too little DAO. And that may be because you have a genetic polymorphism in your ability to produce the DAO enzyme. You may also be ingesting certain foods that I'm going to go through that block DAO enzyme activity. And also, on top of that, you may have something like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which blocks DAO enzyme production and activity. And so, what can happen? You can develop, asthma, allergies, hives, right? Kind of a chronic rhinitis where your nose is constantly running, headaches. These are really common symptoms associated with this. And so different factors of altered DAO production. Again, SIBO is one of the biggest things that I see associated with this. And there is a histamine test that I'm going to go through. And I oftentimes see when people test high for elevated levels of histamine and low DAO, that they have SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. But it could also be associated with deficiencies in copper and B6, which are really critical for degrading histamine. Also, low vitamin C can play a role in that as well. Leaky gut syndrome, and then also genetic polymorphisms, particularly in the DAO enzyme. The homozygous trait for the DAO enzyme would be a very, very slow DAO enzyme, not able to metabolize histamine very well. Also, you may be using certain medications that block DAO production. And these are really common medications. So NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, ibuprofen and aspirin, some of the most common over-the-counter medications, they block DAO enzyme production. You've got antidepressants. We have a antidepressant culture. We have so many people on antidepressant prescriptions, and these can block DAO enzyme production. You got different immune modulators for people with autoimmune disease like Humira. You've got anti-arrhythmics, so people with arrhythmias. Antihistamines, obviously, what does that do? It's going to block histamine, but it's also going to affect DAO enzyme production. And it oftentimes can create a dependency on the antihistamines because your body's not able to have its own antihistamine activity because you're taking these drugs. And then histamine H2 blockers, which also are going to affect digestion, and basically by suppressing stomach acid production, they're also going to impact your ability to sterilize your food and going to increase your risk of bacterial overgrowth like SIBO, candida overgrowth, parasites developing different nutrient deficiencies because you need the right amount of stomach acid in order to absorb things like B12, iron, zinc. And that's going to cause long-term problems for you. So our histamine bucket, okay, you can see when the bucket overflows, that's when we have major symptoms. So in the beginning, the body's managing histamine activity with the sufficient amount of DAO enzyme. Over time, though, just based on the environment, as you can see in the bucket, drugs, diet, stress, hormones that we're being exposed to, like in conventionally raised animal products, different nutritional deficiencies that take place, the body can start to struggle with the overall histamine load, and symptoms can vary. Sometimes you can have symptoms at that point. Sometimes you don't even notice any symptoms. Then as the bucket starts to overflow, that's when you get the inflammation and really major symptoms come on. And over time, that can even progress to life-threatening anaphylaxis, right? So just significant problems there. Now you can get tested. We have a great test. It's our histamine testing that you can find on drjockers.com. And I do have an article that goes with this video where I go over the testing. But basically what this is going to look at, it's going to look at your DAO enzyme activity. So you can see on this sample copy here, this person's in the optimal range. It's also going to look at zonulin. Zonulin is a key compound that has to do with the integrity of the gut lining, because the higher your zonulin levels that they find on this blood test, the more is seeping through the intestinal lining. So it's a marker of leaky gut. This is also looking at your histamine levels. And you can see right here, this is borderline going, in a sense, borderline high with the histamine levels. This person, even though they've got normal levels of, or optimal levels of DAO and optimal zonulin, somewhat borderline high in histamine. So they may just be eating a lot of histamine-rich foods, and that could be doing this. But they have the good enzyme activity, and their gut junction, it seems to be intact. They don't have very high zonulin. Now let's look at this individual right here. We're looking at LPS, lipopolysaccharides, which are the outer cell wall of gram-positive bacteria. And basically their outer cell wall will get out into the bloodstream. And so the body creates an immune reaction. LPS is called endotoxin. It's a highly inflammatory agent. And if we do have a lot of LPS seeping into the bloodstream, we will create antibodies to it. So you can see with this person, they have got a very high LPS IgM, okay, but a low LPS IgG. And usually IgM is associated with an acute reaction. So it's like they just recently were exposed, whereas IgG would be more chronic exposure. And then you've got the IgA, which is what's happening right in the gut mucosa, at this moment. Okay, and see, this person's actually low in those areas, and so this would be more of an acute type of reaction to the LPS right there. And so that's a really cool thing about this test. Again, it's called the Advanced Intestinal Barrier Assessment. We call it histamine testing on our website. Now, certain foods, and you can see some of them here, like fermented foods like soy sauce, aged cheeses. You've got different types of aged meats, right? Smoked meats that can be higher in histamine. And these would be foods, and then red wine as well, that you'd want to avoid if you're noticing you've got issues with histamine. And, for free, without doing any testing, you can always do like a 1 week low histamine diet and see if you feel better. So here are the histamine rich foods: fermented alcoholic beverages, fermented foods in general. As foods are fermenting, there's more histamine compounds that are produced. So these are very healthy foods, except unless you are a poor histamine metabolizer. Then things like sauerkraut, vinegar, soy sauce, kefir, yogurt, kombuchas can be really bad for you if that's the case. Same thing with pickles, mayonnaise, olives. These can all be really bad if you can't metabolize histamine. Cured meats, bacon, salami, pepperoni, luncheon meats, hot dogs, soured foods. So these, again, fermented foods, dried fruit, most citrus fruit, lemons and limes. If you're responding poorly to lemons and limes, it may be because you have this histamine reaction. Aged cheese like goat cheese, nuts can play a big role with this. Walnuts, cashews, peanuts, different types of vegetables, avocados, for example, really great food. I'm a huge fan of avocados, but if you're not breaking down histamines well, avocados can be a problem. Smoked fish. Okay, I'm a huge fan. I do smoked salmon. My family, we love that. But if I had a histamine response, I would need to come off of that. And then you've got certain foods as well that aren't necessarily histamine rich, but they're going to block DAO enzyme production. So that's going to be just any sort of alcohol drink. And avocados kind of have both things where they can block a little bit of the DAO, and at the same time, they're also a little bit higher in histamine. And some people react poorly to avocados, other people don't. And the thing with histamine intolerance, I've seen that some individuals, there's like 10 foods on this list that they just can't eat, they react to, but the other foods are fine with. So it's not, 100% for everybody. You kind of have to experiment to find out what's going on with you. But if you know people that are responding poorly to things like pineapple, papaya, shellfish, chocolate, bananas, right? It's probably related to this sort of histamine response. So be sure to, do a good scour of this list and experiment for yourself to see where you're at. Now, how do you improve histamine metabolism? Well, certainly improving gut health, and that, big player in that is taking out foods that are causing inflammation, like we just talked about. In general, reducing inflammation, hydrating your body well. You can take anti-inflammatory supplements, can be really helpful, like curcumin and quercetin and vitamin C and different things like that, glutathione. You want to improve your liver function. So good hydration is important for that. Exercise can be great for liver. Also, things like milk thistle can be really, really helpful for liver as well, and alpha lipoic acid and glutathione and N-acetylcysteine and B vitamins, a lot of good things for liver. Your dark green leafy vegetables, in particular bitter herbs. I always say bitter is good for your liver, so dark green leafies and things like arugula and dandelion and parsley, ginger, these are all really, really good for liver. Stabilize the adrenals. You got to get that blood sugar stable, really focus on and prioritize sleep and stress relief in a sense, right? And just creating peace in your life and doing a lot of deep breathing and meditation can all be really, really supportive to improving your histamine metabolism. So beyond that, along with experimenting with a lower histamine diet, you may want to add in some different supplements. And we actually created a histamine support pack with 3 time-tested supplements that support the histamine response. So from left to right, on the left, you've got Hista Response. And Hista Response is basically a type of probiotic that helps degrade the histamine molecule. So it's Bacillus coagulans, a soil-based spore-forming microorganism. And then also on top of that, we have got hyperimmunized IgY immunoglobulins to help support the gut immune system, right? And help balance and modulate the gut immunity. And there's research out there showing utilizing this supplement alone without diet changes can really help reduce the overall histamine levels in the body. You've got allergy defense, which has a group of time-tested herbs and compounds that degrade and basically help reduce the histamine response. So you got vitamin C, you've got nettle, you've got quercetin, you've got the proteolytic enzyme bromelain. These are all really powerful for downregulating the histamine response. Okay, then you've got Histoprotect, which is actually DAO enzymes. This is an enzyme supplement that helps degrade histamine. So if you are going to eat some of those higher histamine foods, you want to have that Histoprotect. If you are just seems like you're reacting to lots of things, and I take care of a lot of clients that do, they're highly reactive, that Histoprotect can be a life-saving supplement because they notice that they're able to degrade the histamine and respond significantly better. So you can check that out. I have a link below this video. Hopefully this video was really helpful for you guys. Would love to hear your comments if you've dealt with a histamine response or not. And certainly if you've got people that have symptoms that we've talked about associated with histamine, definitely tune them into this video. So I will see you guys on a future training. Be blessed, everybody. Bye-bye.